everyone to that live session for the High Quality Pork Congress 2020. I am Stefan von Berg. I'm a part of MSD's global swine team. And it is my pleasure to co-host this session with my colleague and friend Miguel here. In our virtual High Quality Pork Congress, we explore the evolution of the swine industry, looking at consumer trends, at innovation in technology, in pre-recorded webinars. And these webinars are still available, by the way. So if you're interested and have not seen them yet, I strongly encourage you to do, though. It's very interesting topics that are covered. And today we are talking about diseases and innovation in solutions. And this is the first of two live sessions in the High Quality Pork. And we're going to have a very interesting roundtable discussion covering gut health, immunology, diseases, including their impact and their control. The second live session will take part in October, when we will have a look at field experience in disease control. With this set and setting the scope of today's event, I'll hand over to Miguel.
Thank you, Stefan. Well, as Stefan was mentioning, we will to cover these, let's say, 5 pillars: gut health, immunology, prevalence, predisposing factors, and then the vaccine. And to do that, what we did is that we tried to find the best in class that they can talk about that. So, and we really found it. So to do that, for us, it's a pleasure to have for the gut health, what I would like to call Mr. Gut Health, or Mr. Rice, that was in the past. So, well, anyway, I don't want to go deep on the long CV of Dr. Pluske, but how it comes, this interest, Dr. Pluske, from these historical documentaries about military also and medical? How it comes this passion?
In secondary school, history was one of my subjects, and I was very fascinated, particularly by European history. And I have a European background, and much of that history involved conflicts and resolution of those conflicts. So I guess that is where my interest in these documentaries really started.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pluske. Well, and as I told you, we try to find the best in class, and the best in class that we found for immunity is Dr. Fabio Vanucci. Fabio Vanucci actually is associate professor at the University of Minnesota. So Fabio, why you are a kind of passion guy, like Stefan, my colleague, you are a passion guy for the podcast. So where it comes this, and especially I think that Elizabeth Day, no, it's one of the ones that you prefer.
Well, that's I guess I spend quite a few time of my early mornings running, which is another passion. So I usually listen quite a few podcasts, and the Elizabeth Day one is one of the ones that I have been listening lately, but there's a lot of more than, so I spend my time by myself and listening the podcast. It's something that I really like to do.
Thank you very much. From that, we will switch to Miriam Arnold. Miriam, she is our Mrs. Prevalence. The reason of that is because Miriam is now actually is resident of the European College of Porcine and Health Management. And one of the things that surprised from Miriam is the fact that she's in love of one German series that it's called something like Kudam 56. I don't know anything about this series. I need to go to look at that. Why, if I need to do that, Miriam?
Because it is a very, very nice series, only taking part in Berlin at the time of the Second World War. Maybe that's typical for Germans concentrating on that. But it has a little bit of medical history inside. It has a little bit of general history, a little bit of love, a little bit of everything. So very nice.
Lovely. Series. Great. Thank you, Miriam. And of course, when we talk about predisposing factors, one of the, well, let's say that Heiko is one of the, Dr. Heiko Nontis is one of our preferred guys to do that. Heiko actually is the president, is the president of the ECPHM. And Heiko, I don't understand how you can combine Dr. House with jumping with horses. So it's something that it's difficult to combine, no?
I share one behavior that I like to work with my team. I really enjoy that, but I do not need to be at the front. So that's where I have my team members.
Nice. Thank you, Heiko. That's really nice from you. And finally, we have our Mr. Baxin. I know that, Ton, you are not let's say, a fan of TVs and things like this, but do you enjoy a lot skiing?
In my free time, I like to be outside and being active in skiing in the snow or on the water, even without skis on my barefoot. I did in the past when I was younger. And and for the rest, I like playing bridge, the card game.
Thank you very much.
In competition.
That's nice. So thank you very much. And as you see, we don't have a usual, let's say, introduction of people because, nowadays with Google, you can Google the names and you have all the information. And you know really very well the people that we have here. But I think that we were thinking that it was nice at least to have some extra information from all these people to know about TVs and things like this. So, Stefan, should we start with the real science?
Yes, of course, Miguel. Thank you very much for that introduction round, and very interesting to see some interest of the professional and scientific track.
By the way, Stefan, you love horses as well.
Yes. So I'm keeping them, and it's a recreational hobby. Anyway, I would like to go into our discussion and our roundtable, and you already introduced Dr. Plasky as Mr. Gut Health, and that's really what his work record really shows, and this is of big interest for us. And Dr. Plasky, let me jump into the discussion by asking you a very broad question, and that is that we and in the media we often hear that gut health is strongly linked to overall health of an individual. Would you agree on that? And why? And if not, also why?
Gut health is a term that really, I guess, has gained a lot of attention in the last 10 to 15 years in the swine and poultry industries, really linked to, I guess, regulations and bans in certain countries around the use of certain types of antibiotics. It has many definitions and interpretations, and unfortunately, I think in some of the press and some of the information that is released, the interpretation of gut health is, let me say, it is perhaps loose or is not particularly well defined, and in that case, there may be some confusion about its real meaning, but I guess to try and encapsulate a general meaning, in my view, it's around a generalized condition of homeostasis or balance in the gastrointestinal tract with respect to a whole range of structural and functional characteristics and features of the gastrointestinal tract. Including digestion and absorption, excretion of wastes, coexistence of microbes, that under normal conditions prevents any dysbiosis or disturbances or misbalance, if you like, such that, and we can relate that to our own gastrointestinal tract, such that under normal conditions it functions quite nicely and enables all those physiological, immunological, microbiological and neurological functions to occur. So I guess, Stefan, that would be my interpretation of gut health. As far as an organ is concerned, the gastrointestinal tract is my favourite organ. I think it just is an incredible part of the animal, any particular animal. And I think as more and more research is investigated, we're now seeing links, for example, between the gastrointestinal tract and the brain. We're seeing links between the gastrointestinal tract and the respiratory system, and vice versa. So I think in an interconnected way, the gut and the normal structure and function of the gut is very, very crucial.
Dr. Pluske, I have a question. How is the, and I would like to short answer if it's possible, how good is the gut health of the pigs? I know that it's a stupid question, you know, I make this stupid question, but are we having healthy pigs on gut health terms or not really?
I think most of the time, Mikkel, and it depends on the situation, of course. There's always a rider or always a caveat on this, but in general conditions, I think it's important to realise that the gastrointestinal tract is constantly being challenged, and other speakers can talk about this more in a more professional way than I can. But the gut is always being challenged, and certainly there are production phases for swine where the gut functions normally, and therefore if we look at health as an overall term of structure and function, then yes, the animal is in a good balance, if you like. But as we know, there are stages of production, and we know some of those stages very well, such as after weaning, where the balance in the intestinal tract is disturbed, and that is where gut health is compromised.
I know that because I know that your PhD was around that, no? The stress on that moment and how that was influenced. Sorry, Stefan, for that.
Correct.
No need to apologize, because that was exactly an interesting point that I would like to go after, to explore the impact of stress. And you've named one of the most stressful situations that a pig encounters in his life, and that is weaning. Because as a veterinarian, I know the experience is that you often see some kind of diarrhea in the nursery related to the weaning, and it's hard to find a causative agent for that or whatever cause. But as I understand, the stress can also lead to a disbalance in the gut that might cause such a clinical sign.
Correct, Stefan. That's correct. And I mean, weaning is certainly one of the most stressful experiences of any animal, really, any suckling animal, and particularly in swine, where the commercial reality means that that animal is weaned at an age earlier than it would be under wild or natural conditions. If we look at the growth and development of the gastrointestinal tract in a young pig, it does continue to develop. It is relatively immature at 3 to 4 weeks of age, which coincides obviously with the natural weaning age. And when we separate those piglets from their mother, they are moved, sometimes thousands of kilometres. They are trucked to different locations. They are offered a different feed. The temperature might be different. They might be mixed with litter mates that they are not familiar with. Then that evokes a whole range of physiological stimuli and physiological responses. And certainly there's very nice evidence now to show that the release of certain hormones and neurohormones from the hypothalamus, from the brain, can have a direct impact on, for example, barrier function of the gastrointestinal tract. And that happens very quickly. Within 12 to 24 hours of that piglet being removed from its mother, we see almost catastrophic changes in the barrier function, the permeability function of that gastrointestinal tract. And one of the outcomes, amongst other factors such as the change of diet, one of the outcomes of that is diarrhea, post-weaning diarrhea.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, the severity of that can be different, but it typically, it's a typical outcome of the weaning stress.
Yeah, and if you throw in some pathogens into the mix, it's sure adding up to the whole situation.
Correct.
Probably. Yeah, and when we are looking at the gut health or the gut as an really, and you explained it nicely in your opening statement, as a really multifunctional organ. It's not just digestive, but many roles, even many connected to a neurological function, etc. What is the potential impact on the nutrition on these roles? Do we have ways to support the animal via nutrition?
Yes, my background is really nutritional digestive physiology, and it's been an area that I've been very interested in for many years, and obviously with the change in some parts of the world with the use of some antimicrobial compounds, then there's been, I guess, renewed focus on what can be fed or what can be offered in the water to pigs around those stressful periods. And I think it's also worth mentioning that there are other stressful periods in pigs production phases as well. For example, moving pigs. There are still some units that have a traditional nursery phase, grower phase, and finish phase, and often there is movement and or mixing of pigs there. And some of those same principles apply. But with respect to nutrition, wow, there are many possibilities and many options, and I can think of many. I think some of the most profound impacts can be seen with the macro composition of the diet, and an example of that is the protein content in that starter diet. We've seen large reductions in the overall amount of protein that's being offered to those piglets after weaning, and that has had a beneficial impact on diarrhea, even in the absence of feeding compounds such as zinc oxide, or if you can still feed them, antibiotic growth promotants or prophylactic antibiotics. And then we have a whole range of other nutritional additives that really, such as prebiotics, probiotics, organic acids, phytogenics, and their role is really around a nurturing role or a supporting role as that gut changes from an intestinal tract that has adapted to consuming milk from the mother to one that has to adapt to a more vegetable or plant-based diet. And there are various tools and various modulations to try and ease that transition. And certainly you see it on some commercial facilities where the combination of nutrition plus management has a much reduced impact on for example, diarrhea, and therefore transition can be minimized.
Let me jump in here. Sorry, because this is now coming to a stage in the discussion when we are talking about the diarrhea and the effect of the nutrition on on also eventually fighting diseases or controlling diseases, where also the aspect of immunity, the gut immunity, plays a role. And this is something where I would like to pull Dr. Vannucci into the talk, into the discussion, and to ask him about his view on the role or the immunity in the gut, in the intestinal tract, fighting the potential pathogens that are there and that might be fostered by maybe failures in the nutrition. Fabio, did you? Dr. Vanucci? Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, here I am.
Yeah,
Good morning again, everybody.
Fabio, come on, you are Mr. Immunity. So if it's about immunity, it's about you. So and you know, you are the one that they have some work done on this research done in this area. That I think that it will be great to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the doctor immunity part, but I can share some of the experience that we have here on that area, and yeah, just follow up on the discussion with Dr. Plusky. It was definitely the immune response on the gut. On the gut, it's a big piece of the part of the maintaining the homeostasis on the gut health in general as a concept of that, and it's somewhat well established, despite the nutrition part of the organ, that the gut is the largest immune organ on the body. And would that make sense if you think about the amount of ginormous microbial load that it takes and the distribution of the immune cells throughout the gut, which include some organized lymphoid tissue, but also include the distribution diffusely of immune cells throughout the mucosa of the gut. So that's a huge part when you think about the complexity of that and how would that play a role on the gut health in general, and in terms of holding back the amount of microbial that are exposed, that will be either on the ferrying age or on the weaning age, especially with a more significant load of microbial there. At the same time, we are kind of asking the lymphoid tissue on that area to not respond or over-respond to the microbial load, right? So it's a pretty complex homeostasis that has taken place there. So talking about the weaning and some of the pathogens that we discussed, that it's probably one of the most important one on that area is the well known as a post-weaning diarrhea, the E. coli related diarrhea. So we don't want the gut to respond on every single strain of E. coli, but we want the gut to respond to some specific strains of E. coli. So we ask pretty specific tasks for them to do. So that balancing on the immune response, it's pretty critical. And we wanted them to play around that complexity at the same time that we wanted them the pigs to grow fast and be prepared for the pathogens that they want to face throughout their life. But it's definitely a big piece on the gut health. I would consider that.
Yeah, for sure. And you already mentioned the balance of reacting to pathogen or not. And if you would have to name pathogens where you definitely want to have a strong reaction in the gut, what would come to your mind? If you would have to make a list of bad guys.
Yeah, no, sure. I'll try to answer that by phase. That maybe that'll be easier, and I can put two or three more important ones that I can think about as starting with the ferrying age. We talk about rotavirus, which is still a big problem endemically here in North America, and I believe throughout globally. And the coronavirus and the enteric coronavirus, PED and TGE, are the biggest one there. Too, and in the bacterial side, there will be the E. coli on the transition from the weaning age will be one of the most important one. And if you go down the road, Lawsonia, it's one of the big challenges and one of the biggest prevalence that we have, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that later. Depending on the phase on the nursery, you still can see E. coli playing a role. And then Brachyspire is another one. And of course, if you're talking about the Dr. Pluskin mentioned about the reduction of antimicrobial usage, some enteric salmonellosis, it has been a big problem too. And then you can jump through and arguing that it will be a public health concern too. So I kind of superficially give more or less the main ones that we see on a routine basis here in the diagnostic lab in terms of importance. Yeah. I may miss some, but I think that's all.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, unfortunately, we lack the time to really dig deep into the topics. But and that's an interesting list that you presented, and for some of these vaccines, some of these diseases, we have vaccines present as a control measurement. Some need to be treated by antibiotics. And from your point of view, do you think that it is possible to have let's say a positive side effect in, for example, controlling Lawsonia on the effect of Brachyspira or Salmonella, even if they are not directly targeted by the control measure?
Yeah, I would think so, especially again back to the gut health discussions in terms of if you have a pathogen, and doesn't matter which pathogen it is, you are compromising the ability of the gut to respond specifically for another pathogen. So you are disruption of the homeostasis on the gut, which means that you are be compromising in terms of responding to any type of injury or any type of challenge that you have on the intestinal epithelium or in the mucosa in general. So I definitely think that one can coexist with each other, and one can be compromised by the challenge of each other too. Either, if you have a challenge on the growing finishing phase and you are compromising a response by a pathogen or even by a stress on the weaning age or in the nursery phase, you definitely gonna have a lower or a non-satisfactory response on the growing finishing phase.
Okay.
Let me switch, Stefan, because here I think that it could be nice when we were talking about different pathogens and how Lawsonia is there. It probably will be nice to have the opinion. What do you think if we switch to what is prevalence?
Yeah, I agree, and that's a good next step. Yeah.
So, well, yeah, probably if we talk about prevalence, who you suggest to ask the next question, Stefan?
You already said it. It would be Dr. Arnold,
okay,
from Bern, with her nice data on the prevalence of Lawsonia.
Yeah, and I think that she already prepared some presentation or some short introduction on that she can share with that. So, Dr. Arnold, please, can you share with that with all of us this prevalence in EU that you work on it?
Yeah, hello, thank you. I hope you can see the presentation already.
Perfectly.
Great. So, yeah, I was wondering in the year 2017 about the prevalence of Lawsonia in European countries. We were wondering how many animals are suffering from the pathogen, so how often do we detect it directly, the pathogen, and also antibodies. So how many animals had contact with the pathogen. And as you nicely explained, we prepared some slides because we thought it might be easier to understand and see the data. That's why I have just 5 slides prepared for you, so maybe we can go through together.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
So for the beginning, it would be which countries were included. Obviously, Europe is also quite big, or it has a lot of countries, and we were not able to include all of them. But what we did is to have a look how many pigs are kept in which countries, and then included the countries with most pigs. And so on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the countries which are marked and colored. These kept together more than 60% of all the pigs in 2017, which is when the study was started. And further, we were thinking about, we wanted to know how many animals have pathogen within their feces. So it was important for us that animals which were sampled were not treated with antimicrobials. And as already mentioned, not only bacteria, so against antibiotics, for example, also zinc oxide was included, as it can have an impact on the gastrointestinal flora, as we just heard. So this was excluded 4 weeks prior to sampling. And we also thought from the practical side of view that it might be important or interesting how often the pathogen is detected in herds which actually have problems with diarrhea. So one inclusion criterion was only to include herds which had problems or difficulties with diarrhea in the preceding 12 months. It was not important for us if it was diarrhea of an infectious cause or not infectious, just as if the farmer had the feeling we have some difficulties with diarrhea on the farm, that was okay for us. And this is how we sampled the animals. So we included these 6 countries, as you can see on the right side. We took fecal samples for direct detection method. We chose a quantitative polymerase chain reaction, qPCR, because there you can see also the concentration of the pathogen, because we knew already that the pathogen is very widely distributed, but it can only multiply within the animal. So we said, okay, if we have a high concentration of the pathogen within the feces, it multiplied within the animal, resulting in there might be some damage of the mucosa or some histological lesions, which might result again in, for example, reduced growth or diarrhea, something like that. So this is why we took fecal samples. In addition, we also took some blood samples. And in the lower area of the slide, you can see which animals were sampled. As we heard, weaning is a very difficult time for the pig. So we wanted to include animals from about 10 kilograms onwards, which we called nursery pigs. Animals later on, which were called growing pigs, from about 25 to 40 kilograms. And the last group was then adult animals or older animals, the finishing pigs till slaughter. So that's from the material methods part, what we did. And now let's have a look at the results. As you might have expected, the prevalence is very high. So more than 90% of our herds which were sampled had at least one pig which had Lawsonia within the feces detected by qPCR. So on the left side, you can see these yellow bars, and you see the 6 countries, and you can see that every bar is very high. And you might have the feeling, okay, they're not all equally high, but there was no significant difference between the countries. So prevalence was high in every country we analyzed. In gray, you can see the within herd prevalence, so the number of animals which were positive per herd. If you look closer, you see that in Denmark, the number is a little bit higher than, for example, compared to Spain. So we had some country-specific differences here regarding the within herd prevalence between countries. I mentioned the different age categories. So on the right-hand side, you can see the 3 age categories we sampled in each country. Let's start with the yellow bar. Most countries have a bar which is quite flat, but there's one country which has a very high bar, which is Denmark. So in Denmark, more than 60% of the nursery pigs were positive for Lawsonia intracellularis in their feces. This was super surprising to us. I don't know if you have expected that, but we did not. Also in literature, it's not shown, or it was not explained so far. So that was really interesting for us. Which was known or was described as that growing pigs are mostly suffering. So we detected the pathogen the most often in growing pigs. If you have an overall look, so all countries together, then it would have been the growing pigs, which were mostly affected by Lawsonia in their feces. I also want to show you some results of the ELISA analysis we did. Also here, the prevalence is very high with more than 91% of herds positive, but obviously that makes sense if we have a lot of bacteria in the herds, so more than 90% had bacteria within the herds, the immune system reacts and we also get antibodies. It was quite clear, and also here again, you have the yellow bars and you see there was no real differences between the countries. The within herd prevalence, again, the gray bars, you can see that Denmark, again, is a little bit higher than, for example, Spain. And something else which was known is that the older the animal gets, the more likely it is that the animal has antibodies against Lawsonia. This was also shown in our studies. On the right-hand side, you can see the graph, the yellow one again with the nursery pigs. Only 5% of the nursery pigs had antibodies against Lawsonia. And then it's rising till the growing pigs with more than 60% of them showing antibodies. So as a little bit take-home message, Lawsonia spread around Europe in very high concentration. So a lot of herds are positive. But as we did the qPCR result, I would like to add some little thing which is not on the slide. More than 50% of the samples we analyzed for qPCR had a very, very low concentration of Lawsonia within the feces. So it is questionable if the pathogen really multiplied within the animal, or if we just detected a pathogen which went orally inside the animal and outside again without affecting it in a severe manner. But that's a hypothesis. So maybe think about which test you want to take regarding Lawsonia. That would be my statement, I think.
That's so great. I have a temptation, once I'm seeing these results, and my temptation is to jump from Europe to jump to Latin America and North America. And just because we have Dr. Fabio Banucci here, my temptation is, what do you think about these results, Dr. Banucci, for your experience that you have in diagnostic? And are you surprised about that? Do you think that North America and Latin America, for your experience, they are around that? What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting results, and especially I would say here for us it would be more uniform towards the growing and finishing phase in terms of prevalence. And it was interesting to see in some countries a high prevalence even on the early age, which is quite interesting, especially thinking about, again, the reduction on the use of antimicrobials as a growth promoter. And I don't know if I can ask question, but one of the questions that I would like to ask would be one of the things that we do here in the US is that we kind of combine the seroprevalence with the qPCR results, depending on the stage of the production. And I'm wondering how that type of data would fit together, in terms of within herd prevalence, right? You have the within herd prevalence of shedding and the within herd prevalence of seroprevalence. Are they in the same age? Are they after?
Good question for Dr. Arnold. Dr. Arnold, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Could you please explain what you mean by seroprevalence herds?
The ELISA results.
The ELISA results.
Yeah.
We had one herd which was negative in ELISA results and in qPCR results. So it was just one herd.
Wow.
But as you might have seen, we sampled 144 herds in total for qPCR, but only 60 herds for ELISA results. So out of 60 herds, one was negative in both, which is, to my thinking, not that much.
But the 60 herds are within the 140.
Yeah, exactly. They are the same herds. So we sampled blood and feces from the same animals.
Yeah, one of the scenarios that we see here, most common that we see here on the growing finishing phase, that's talking about weeks, for example, 15 or 16 weeks, we start to see a very high prevalence on the shedding. And then 18, 19, or 20 weeks of age, we start seeing the seroconversion, the serum. I'm just wondering if you see that type of, trend on the result.
Yeah, we could see that kind of trend, but it was a little bit more difficult because we just had these 3 age groups and we couldn't say, okay, the animal is exactly 10 weeks old or 12 weeks. So that's information I don't have because it would have been too much data for people sampling. But we can see that the prevalence in our qPCR results are higher first and then the antibodies are rising. So this correlation.
Yeah, that type of trend probably would help you speculating more in terms of these animals are positive because the Lawsonia is replicating that and they are mounting an immune response. You know what I'm saying? And not just passing through there.
Yeah, but we know as well that the amount or the concentration of Lawsonia we find in feces is correlated to lesions within the gastrointestinal tract. So this is also a very good correlation we know of, and I expect if you have lesions in the gastrointestinal tract, the animal is affected on some area. It might be immunology or slower growth or diarrhea, no matter, but it's affected.
Doesn't matter. One thing that it's clear, Stefan, it looks like Lawsonia prevalence is quite high, no? So maybe maybe we maybe we need to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me to the next thought. And to see that high prevalence, this means that there's quite a high risk that an animal might get infected over the course of its life. And for sure, and I assume that there are factors influencing that risk in a positive or negative way. And I would like to bring that question up to Dr. Nathus, and to get your view on the risk factors for Lawsonia infections, also in light of this prevalence data that we've seen.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan, for handing over and asking this question about prevalence. And maybe I first have to go back a little bit, also back to Miriam's study and the comments that we got from the US. It is challenging that if you or when you run a prevalence study and then at the end close to 100% of the herds are positive, now just talking about seropositivity, it's extremely difficult to determine any risk factors at all, because with what do you want to compare those seropositive herds if you don't have seronegative herds? So this is already challenging, and this also led us to the conclusion that it would be better to take the qPCR results and no longer look for risk factors that determine the likelihood of infection, which could be confirmed by seroconversion, but more to look at the qPCR results that are, at least for us, they are a very good proxy for disease. And I think that's also for the vets in the field and producers, it's even more important to know where does the disease happen, so in which age category is the disease likely, rather than is my herd infected or yes or no, because this question can be answered very easy. Just think of yes, because that's the most likely scenario in the field. It's more or less ubiquitous, so you have to consider Lawsonia intracellular as we heard before as one of the most important pathogens. But now it's interesting to know, do I have a risk of having disease, which we link a little bit to the amount or concentration of Lawsonia that we can find in the feces by qPCR. And when doing so, of course, it becomes a bit more challenging because, as Miriam already said, there were about 50% of qPCR positive samples that we do not consider as reflecting or representing disease, but we had close to 50% where we thought, okay, these are indicators of disease. And when we run the risk factor analysis, or when we look at correlation to herd characteristics, we could find some factors that are easy to understand. So, for instance, large group size in the nursery, more than 30 piglets per pen, or if you have a bit more concrete floor in the nursery unit. So we determined about 80%, 78% as a threshold. So if there's less than 80% slatted floor, then there's higher exposure to feces on the ground, and thereby a higher likelihood of taking up the pathogen from that area. Interestingly, we found some other risk factors that I know from other diseases. So, for instance, there was the length of the suckling period or the weaning weight that was also a risk factor. So, by an increased weaning weight or suckling period longer than 4 weeks, we see an increase of positive animals in that herd, and that's interesting because we see similar similar influences of this time under exposure, also, for instance, with Mycoplasma high pneumonia. So that was very interesting to find out.
Okay, so that from your interpretation is that because the most likely source of infection is the sow, the mother, and the longer they are exposed to that, they get infected?
We know that from various other infectious diseases that the longer piglets stay with their mother dam, the higher the likelihood that they are somehow the infection. You could also think in the opposite. So the longer piglets are protected by a maternal immunity, but for this we have also an expert in the panel on immunity, so I will not talk too much about that. But you could imagine, you could also hypothesize that the longer piglets are protected under maternal immunity in the milk, they might be less likely to become infected. But it seems that at least for some infection, this does not apply. And we found it for both for the number of or the prevalence among nursery pigs, but also the whole herd prevalence, which increases with weaning age or with weaning weight. So that was confirmed twice in the study.
Well, it's interesting data also to eventually look deeper into, for sure. And it is also interesting to see that we are able to identify risk factors, and this can lead eventually to action in the farms or for the producers. And this takes me to another question, because I know that you are also very, very interested and active in farm economics. And do you have an idea, or can you give an idea of the financial impact of a Lawsonia infection for a farm, maybe even a subclinical infection?
Yeah, it's very difficult to give you one single figure, because it strongly depends, of course, on the severity of the disease and the prevalence that you have in your farm. And if you talk about economics in a farm in a serious way, then you should always consider the individual farm with all the specific parameters that you have in that farm. Maybe it's better to give some figures that help you in order to determine the individual loss that a farm has based on deviations in biological KPIs. So as a rough estimate, if you look to the literature, as a rough estimate, you can assume in the steps of slightly affected, moderately affected, and severely affected, you can assume a 5% decrease in ADG, or 10% or 20%, so depending on the severity. And the same applies to FCR. If you combine that, both ADG and FCR, you have to consider up to 20% more feed that you need to bring in order to bring a pig to slaughter, and 20% more feed. This needs to be converted now according to the feed price in the particular country. I mean, this is now, we are talking about global high-quality pork meeting, so I'm pretty sure that the damage is, or the economic impact is a bit different when we go to South America or to Europe or to Asia. But I think that people can roughly calculate what are the costs of 20% more feed, and then you have a rough estimate of the economic impact.
Yeah,
but sorry, no.
But we can be sure that there will be an economic impact.
If you look to more specific literature, you can see that in the US, for instance, it's about $10 per pig at least. Can be up to $15. In Europe, there is an average figure of about €7 per pig produced, not per pig affected, but per pig produced. But again, I think that nowadays the 20% of feed that you need is even more than €7. It's more.
Yeah. I think that Stefan, that could bring us to ask probably to our vaccine guy, let's say, to Ton to ask about the vaccine, no? Because I think, well, who else than Ton could talk about that? I think that we need to say something. First of all, that let me say that before you ask the question. Sometimes we are not, let's say, we are not giving the importance of our R&D people and how important are they from our company. And a company like MSD, to have people like Ton is really important and crucial because, as I was mentioning, he was behind almost around 12 vaccines developed in the company. So my goodness, he has a lot of experience. So thank you, Ton, for being in the company and for helping for all those years and for all this success in the different vaccines. Now you can jump to the question, Stefan.
Yeah, and of course, I fully agree, and I'm really behind that message that you just gave. While we've heard about the prevalence and the potential impact damaging the gut, going to even financial losses. We are coming to the question of control of infections, of Lawsonia infections, and then we're talking about enteric disease, and this poses specific challenges in the development of a vaccine. And Ton, that's what I would like to ask you to tell us a bit about the challenges that you faced in the development process and how to overcome these challenges.
Yeah, of all the vaccines that I have, thank you, Stefan. Of all the vaccines that I have developed, this one was the most difficult and took the longest time to come to an efficacious and safe vaccine. When we started, we thought that we would need a live attenuated vaccine, and I think all or most immunologists would agree with that because live attenuated vaccines are supposed to induce local immunity on the mucosa level of the gut. So they induce IgA. So not the serum antibodies are important, but we believed that the local IgA antibodies would be important. So it was not logical to test an inactivated vaccine, but fortunately we tested both. And to our surprise, the inactivated vaccine induced much better protection than the live attenuated vaccine. We had no explanation for that because we only have the facts. And the inactivated vaccine induced high antibody levels. But on the other hand, we have no correlation with protection, with antibodies and protection. So if we vaccinate pigs with the inactivated vaccine, we can have pigs with high antibodies or low antibodies, but both are protected after vaccination. And so there's no correlation with antibodies. So we always wondered, what is the protection based on? Maybe cellular immunity, but on the other hand, a live vaccine would also induce and trigger cellular immunity. So it's maybe Fabio can tell more about that, but at least our conclusion was very clear that an inactivated vaccine induced superior protection, and that's why we further developed that vaccine to what it is now.
Mm-hmm. And about that. Yeah. Sorry, and about the vaccine. Go ahead, yeah, can you talk about the vaccine, the Lawsonia vaccine?
Yes, we choose to freeze-dry the antigen fraction, so we have a lot of flexibility that our customers can dissolve it in for instance, PCV Ohio. We have shown that protection is as good as Lawsonia alone. You can dissolve in its own solvent, that's Emunate, or you can dissolve it in PCV Ohio, and then you vaccinate against 3 major pathogens. And we hope to have approval by end of this year for the intradermal vaccine, and so then you dissolve it in a small volume for intradermal use, and that can also be dissolved then in PCV ID. So a lot of flexibility if you freeze dry the vaccine.
Okay, And then that's very interesting. But I would like to come back to the challenge. So I understand that you started with, let's say, the logical approach to have a live attenuated vaccine, and you saw a superior efficacy for the inactivated vaccine.
Yeah.
How did you determine the efficacy of the vaccine? Is it done with, because you said you cannot do it on antibodies, is there a challenge model? Because I assume that also is something that's not easy to achieve with Lawsonia.
Yeah, that's what was another thing. Normally, if you want to develop a vaccine, you need a reliable, reproducible challenge model. You have to be able to infect pigs in a reproducible way. So we cultured Lawsonia to high levels and gave that culture orally, but nothing happens. At least in our hands. I know that many researchers had the same problem. There seem to be a few studies in which people claim that they were able to make pigs ill with a laboratory culture of Lawsonia, but we never succeeded in doing that. We have tested 2 low passage strains, isolates of Lawsonia, cultured them to up to 10 to the 9 per milliliter, and gave that orally, but nothing happens. So I don't know. I also have no explanation for that phenomena. On the other hand, if we take field cases and we scrape the affected guts, the mucosa from the affected gut, and we mix that with buffer and give that orally, then we easily can reproduce the disease. So for our vaccine studies, we had to rely on that challenge model.
That probably mimics, in a way, the natural cause of infection, where the pig takes up infested feces.
Yeah, we could use clinical signs, so diarrhea. We demonstrated the shedding by PCR. We saw in the 3rd week after challenge, we saw a loss of weight in the animals. And we also did a necropsy to confirm that there was ileitis, and also histologically with an immunohistochemical investigation. So we clearly could induce clinical signs, and the vaccine was able to protect against that.
Miguel,
So no, yeah, I mean that probably, I don't know, Stefan, I think that we have a discussion going on, and it could go for more and more time, but I don't know, probably now it's time to resume that. What do you think?
Yeah. Looking at the time, I definitely agree, yes.
So yeah, please, go ahead.
So, this is something, and first of all, thank you all for your input and for the discussion in the topics. And what I would like to, or what we would like to have from each of you is one take-home message for this day and for this session. So if somebody who listens, if he just needs to remember one thing of the things you said, what should it be? And maybe let's start with Dr. Plasky. Let's take the order that we had.
Thank you, Stefan. I'm sorry, I was on mute. I've thoroughly enjoyed today's discussion and learnt an awful lot. And I mean, one thing I was going to say, and perhaps if you can bear me another 30 seconds, that we have done quite a lot of infection work and with other pathogens such as Brachyspira as well, and the observations of Dr. Jacobs are somewhat true with Brachyspira infection as well. There is something about a requirement for other bacteria or an interaction between bacteria and the host that we don't quite understand, that that triggers the disease cascade. But when we look at E. coli, ETEC, for example, then that is, we do those experiments all the time, and it is relatively easy to, at least with F4 E. coli, to infect a piglet after weaning. And I think, as perhaps my take-home message is that if we look at gut health, then I think in terms of digestive disorders and pathogens, that each pathogen needs its own particular curiosity and its own particular attention in terms of understanding its etiology, understanding how it interacts with the gastrointestinal tract, and therefore understanding how it can be controlled. Because although we see enteric pathogens all in the gut, in a big word, we know that that is not the case, because different pathogens live in different parts of the gastrointestinal tract and cause disease in different parts of the gastrointestinal tract. And I think from a perspective of gut health, that makes the area very exciting and one that continually needs attention.
Very well. Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Vannucci, your statement, please.
Sure. Well, once again, thank you. And I just want to echo Dr. Pluska's words and just follow up on Dr. Jacobs' comments that from a research perspective, science doesn't really care what you believe. They just show the facts. And Dr. Jacobs just mentioned that and we know that the pig sometimes, or in this example, doesn't really read much of immunology books, and they show the facts, and then we, as a research, have to go after and figure that out, right? And we are eager to explore that area more and see how the immunology play around the gut health, but the facts are there, and it has been pretty well consolidated on the industry for now. So that's something that motivate us and go after that. And I will just finishing that. We talk about high prevalence, and Dr. Jacobs talk about the interaction between the bacteria that necessary to reproduce the disease. But I just want to make sure to not misleading the audience that Lawsonia is a real pathogen, and the Koch postulate has been well established with pure culture of the bacteria and isolation and re-challenge again. So and that's something that we have to pay attention and just pass along now with Dr. Arnold that the prevalence has showed that, and the association with the disease has showed that too. So thank you for the opportunity again, and I'll be happy to interact with you guys again.
Thank you very much. Well, Dr. Arnold, what's your take-home message for the audience?
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, I also would like just to continue with what Dr. Vannucci said. My take-home message for you would be that the prevalence of Lawsonia intracellularis is very high around the world. We showed it in Europe, but also literature knows that it's high around the world. Maybe take home that there are some country-specific differences, that there are some countries in which animals get affected earlier, or at least they seem to get affected earlier, and take that home to your herds and herds that you're dealing with and think, well, when you have nursery pigs or growing pigs suffering from diarrhea, which test you would like to perform. It is important to know and to diagnose the real pathogen which is causing diarrhea in the current phase. And as we know, we also detected Lawsonia quite often in low concentrations. So think about it could be a mixed infection also with other pathogens. Take that in mind. It is very likely that you're going to detect Lawsonia in your herd when it is suffering from diarrhea.
Thank you very much. Great. Dr. Natus, what's your take?
Yeah, I can echo what Miriam Arnold already said, and I know that this might not be a very favorite or very appreciated comment because it's always the wish of companies that you say, okay, the pathogen is everywhere and just vaccinate a second week of life and everything will be solved. I think that today we saw that the prevalence is high, but not only in the different countries, also in the different cases and in the different farms. We need to apply proper diagnostic tools, and I'm convinced that qPCR is one of the most important tools in animals alive, apart from necropsy. Apply proper diagnostics, look for risk factors, determine the economic impact of the infection, and then you come to the conclusion that intervention and prevention make sense. In many, many cases, I'm convinced about that, but do it individually and do it specifically.
Thank you. Thank you. And I can tell you, I would 100% sign that statement. Absolutely. Okay, and Dr. Jacobs, what would be your take-home message?
Yeah, that's a general one. If you have an economical problem with a certain disease and a vaccine is available, use the vaccine and do not use antibiotics, because that causes other problems in the future.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure discussing with you. Thank you, Miguel, for hosting or co-hosting with me. And the last word shall be yours.
Yeah, no, thank you again. Thank you very much, all. And I just was taking notes all the time, and I want to summarize everything the today's meeting. So remember that we were starting with Dr. Pluske, and he was jumping into gut, let's say, gut health. And I think that I get the idea that I will take two main points that I really love of that. He said the catastrophe that happens in 24 hours after winning, that this catastrophe occurs, that is something that I really like. Also, I like what it was the last statement that say that each pathogen needs its own attention, though means that we need to pay attention to the pathogens, especially if they are in the intestine 1. I want to jump to the Dr. Banucci words. He was naming the different pathogens according to the age. So he was going to Rota, Corona, Enteric TGA, E. coli, Lawsonia, Brachyspira, Salmonella. He was listing all that according to the age. But I especially remember that the sentence that he says that science is facts. And also what he says that the pigs doesn't read immunity books, which I'm surprised about that, but I never thought about it. So it was an interesting thing. Of course, he was saying that Lawsonia was a real pathogen. Then when we were jumping to Dr. Arnold, I think that to me it was important to see how important it was the prevalence, this 90 or 26% in what it was PCR, or 91 or 31% on ELISA. So that was, to me, important things. And of course, the sentence that he says that we have a high prevalence around the world, and we may have different depending on the country. So that was also one of the insights that he had here. Dr. Nantus, he was talking about the risk factors. He was pointing some of them. To me, it was interesting to know that more than 15 piglets per pen, it's an issue. Always is an issue to have a lot of animals per pen. The fact to have concrete floor also is an issue. Also long suckling periods or weaning weights or more than 4 weeks. All those, they were important points. But I liked what he was mentioning at the end to say that the importance to look at the prevalence and to look at different things that you can do to reduce these risk factors that you may have, and also talking about prevention. And finally, Dr. Jacobs, I just coined what it was one of the sentences that to me it was important, that he was saying that it was the most difficult vaccine of my life. So from all the vaccines that I've been working, this is one of the most difficult ones. And maybe the final sentence that I think that could summarize everything. If you see that there is an economical issue on that, and you have a vaccine, please use the vaccine and don't use the antibiotic. So with that, I summarize what it's been today's meeting. Again, I apologize for the delay, the issues that we were having. These more than 1,000 people on streaming that they were causing or coming to that, they feel us proud about that we were touching the subject in a manner that you may be interested in that. And with that, I say thank you very much, and I hope to see you next time in another meeting. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Thank you, guys, all the presenters for being there, and also thank you, Stefan, for being there.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.